In August 2016, FBI agents searched a modest house in Glen Burnie, Maryland, and found something that stunned even veteran counterintelligence investigators. 6 full bankers' boxes of classified documents, stacks of digital media, roughly 50 terabytes of stolen government data, tucked into a garden shed, a car, and a bedroom. Prosecutors would later call it the largest theft of classified material in United States history. The man who took it wasn't a spy for a foreign power, at least not one anyone could ever prove. He was a contractor, and for 20 years he had simply been taking things home. Nobody stopped him. For a long time, nobody even knew. His name was Harold Thomas Martin III, a Navy veteran, a doctoral student, a man with a top-secret security clearance, and a job title most of his neighbors probably never fully understood. Co-workers described him as quiet and technically brilliant, the kind of person who blended into a secure facility without drawing a second glance. He had a wife, a home in a working-class suburb outside Baltimore, and on paper, an unremarkable life built around long hours in classified environments. To understand how someone like him could walk out of the most secretive intelligence agency on Earth with 50 terabytes of its most sensitive material, you have to understand what he did, who he worked for, and why the system built to stop this kind of theft simply wasn't looking in his direction. Martin was born in 1961 and spent time in the Navy Reserve before moving into the world of government contracting, the vast and often invisible workforce that keeps American intelligence agencies running. By the mid-1990s, he had a security clearance and access to classified systems. Over the following 2 decades, he moved through 7 different contracting jobs, working for firms that placed him inside multiple agencies: the National Security Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, United States Cyber Command, the National Reconnaissance Office. Eventually, he landed at Booz Allen Hamilton, the same consulting firm that had employed Edward Snowden, and he was placed inside one of the most secretive units in the entire American intelligence apparatus. That unit was called Tailored Access Operations, known inside the NSA simply as TIA-O. If you've never heard of it, that's the point. TIA-O is the NSA's offensive hacking division, the team responsible for breaking into foreign networks, developing custom exploits, and building the tools that let American intelligence quietly slip past firewalls most of the world assumes are unbreakable. These aren't off-the-shelf hacking scripts. They are painstakingly engineered digital weapons, some capable of compromising systems that companies like Cisco and Microsoft insist are secure. Analysts inside TIA-O spend months, sometimes years, developing a single exploit chain, testing it against real-world hardware, and cataloging it for future operations against adversaries ranging from hostile governments to terrorist networks. The people who build and maintain that arsenal sit at the very center of America's cyber capability. Losing control of even a fraction of it doesn't just cost money to rebuild. It can burn years of intelligence work in a single afternoon because, once an exploit is exposed, the vulnerability it relies on gets patched, and the tool becomes worthless. Martin was one of them. This is the part that made his access so dangerous. Contractors inside units like TIA-O aren't just visitors with a badge. They are frequently woven into the operational fabric of the unit itself, writing code, managing infrastructure, and handling the same classified tools as the government employees around them. In fact, in the years following the September 11th attacks, the intelligence community expanded so quickly that it became almost entirely dependent on private firms to supply the technical talent it needed. By some later estimates, roughly a third of the intelligence workforce holding top-secret clearances were contractors rather than direct government employees. That reliance meant thousands of outside personnel were granted access to some of the most closely guarded secrets the country had, often with the same level of trust extended to career federal officers who had spent decades earning it. Martin was simply one contractor among many, a single face in a workforce built on convenience and necessity rather than deep, continuous vetting. But what set him apart was what he chose to do with that access, and how long he managed to do it without anyone noticing. According to federal prosecutors, Martin began taking classified material home as early as 1996, while he was still in the Naval Reserve, years before tailored access operations even became his professional home. It didn't happen all at once. It was gradual, almost domestic in its ordinariness. Reports home, printed documents, digital files copied onto drives, Over time, it accumulated in his house, in his car, and eventually in a storage shed in his backyard, alongside everyday household clutter. Investigators later described finding classified materials, mixed in with children's items and gardening tools, an image that made the scale of the violation feel almost surreal. This wasn't a dramatic espionage operation involving dead drops or secret meetings. It was, by every visible measure, hoarding. Think about what that means in practice. Every single time Martin left a secure facility, he was, in theory, subject to physical checks, badge logs, and monitoring, designed specifically to prevent classified material from leaving the building. And yet, across 7 jobs and roughly 2 decades, he appears to have done exactly that over and over, without a single incident serious enough to end his career or trigger a deeper investigation. Some of what he took was digital, copied onto removable drives at a time when portable storage was ballooning in capacity, while security policies struggled to keep pace. Some of it was paper, carried out the old-fashioned way, in a bag or a folder. Past guards trained to look for far more obvious threats than a soft-spoken, high-performing contractor with 2 decades of unblemished service. And that raises the obvious question. How does someone walk out of the most secure buildings in the country with staggering quantities of classified material, again and again, for 20 years, without triggering a single serious alarm? Part of the answer lies in how differently the intelligence community treated the threat of leaking versus the threat of retention. Security systems at agencies like the NSA were built especially after events like the Snowden disclosures to catch someone actively transmitting secrets outward to a journalist, a foreign government, a public platform. Martin didn't appear to be doing any of that. He wasn't publishing anything. He wasn't selling anything, at least not that investigators could ever establish. He was simply keeping things. And a security apparatus optimized to catch outbound leaks isn't necessarily built to catch someone quietly building a private archive in his garage. There's another factor, one that runs through almost every major insider threat case in modern intelligence history. Contractors moved between jobs and agencies with a frequency that made continuous oversight difficult. Each new position often meant a new set of systems, a new supervisor, sometimes a new employer altogether, even while the same individual retained access to extraordinarily sensitive material. Over 7 different contracting roles across 2 decades, Martin's personal behavior, his growing stockpile at home, existed almost entirely outside the visibility of any single employer or single security review. Background checks tend to look backward, at a person's history before they're cleared. They are far less effective at catching a slow, quiet pattern of accumulation that unfolds gradually across an entire career. By the time federal investigators became aware of Martin, the numbers involved were almost hard to comprehend. Prosecutors said the seized material included roughly 50 terabytes of data, an amount so large it was described in court filings as potentially containing more pages of information than exist in the Library of Congress multiple times over. Among what he took, officials said, was a significant portion of TAO's own hacking tools, the same exploits and capabilities that gave the United States government some of its most valuable offensive cyber advantages. Some reporting on the case put the figure at more than 3/4 of the unit's operational toolkit, an almost unthinkable proportion of one of the most sensitive arsenals in American intelligence, sitting outside government control in a private residence. If those tools had ever ended up in the wrong hands, whether through sale, leak, or simple loss, the damage to national security would have been severe, potentially exposing operations and methods that had taken years and enormous resources to develop, and handing adversaries a blueprint for how American intelligence actually operates inside foreign networks. So how did this finally come to light after 2 decades? The breakthrough didn't come from a routine security audit catching an anomaly. It came, according to reporting on the case, after investigators traced a set of leaked NSA hacking tools and files, then linked some of that trail back to Martin. Picture the moment agents pulled up to that quiet Glen Burnie Street. To the neighbors, it would have looked like any other summer morning. Inside, a coordinated federal team was about to uncover a stockpile that had been building, undetected, since the Clinton administration was in office. In August 2016, FBI agents searched his home and vehicle. What they found matched the scale investigators had feared. Boxes of documents stacked in closets, digital storage devices numbering in the dozens, notes and printouts stuffed into a backyard shed alongside garden tools. It was, according to one prosecutor, breathtaking in its longevity and its scale, a description that would follow the case through every subsequent hearing. Here is where the story takes its strangest and most publicly debated turn. Just weeks before Martin's arrest became public, a mysterious group calling itself the Shadow Brokers had begun releasing a cache of NSA hacking tools onto the internet, tools that appeared to have come from the same tailored access operations unit Martin had worked inside. The Shadow Brokers first surfaced in the summer of 2016, posting cryptic messages online and auctioning off what they claimed were genuine NSA exploits, before leaking a portion of them for free to prove their material was real. Cybersecurity researchers who examined the leaked code quickly confirmed it was authentic, some of the most powerful offensive tools in the American cyber arsenal, suddenly available to anyone who knew where to look. The identity of the Shadow Brokers was never established. Some suspected a nation-state operation, possibly Russian intelligence, using the leak as a form of retaliation or misdirection. Others wondered if it could be an insider working alone. The timing of Martin's arrest was extraordinary. An insider caught hoarding NSA hacking tools, arrested at almost the exact moment a separate group was leaking NSA hacking tools to the public. It's easy to see why speculation exploded immediately. Was Martin secretly the Shadow Brokers? Had he fed them material? Had his stolen cash somehow been compromised and used as the source? It's important to be precise here, because this is where a lot of coverage of this case tends to blur fact and speculation. Investigators reportedly did examine a possible link between Martin and the Shadow Brokers leak, partly prompted by cryptic social media messages he had posted that suggested some knowledge of NSA hacking tools. But despite an extensive investigation, no clear evidence ever tied Martin directly to the Shadow Brokers. He was never charged with providing material to that group, or to any foreign government, or to anyone at all. The connection remained and remains today unproven. What investigators found instead was evidence of retention, not transmission. Martin appears to have kept the material to himself. That distinction matters enormously because it's what makes this case so genuinely unusual within the world of espionage and insider threats. Most major classified information cases carry a clear motive. Someone sells secrets for money. Someone leaks documents to expose wrongdoing. Someone works secretly for a foreign intelligence service. Martin's case offered none of that. No evidence surfaced that he ever sold anything. No evidence surfaced that he leaked anything publicly. No foreign government was ever definitively connected to him. Prosecutors themselves, even while pursuing an extraordinarily serious case, acknowledged they could not establish exactly why he had done what he did. Some who studied the case, and some who knew Martin, floated the idea that he may have simply believed he was doing his job diligently, perhaps keeping materials at home to study, to prepare for work, or, according to some accounts from those close to him, in a manner connected to compulsive hoarding behavior that extended into other areas of his personal life. Defense filings during the case pointed to mental health struggles as part of the broader picture, describing a man under significant personal strain rather than a calculated traitor plotting against his country. Family members reportedly described him as dedicated to his work, almost to a fault, someone who struggled to leave his job behind at the end of the day, in the most literal sense possible. None of this was ever proven as the definitive explanation, and it's worth being honest that the full truth of his motive has never been publicly established with certainty. It is entirely possible that even prosecutors, after years of investigation, never fully closed that gap between what Martin did and why he did it. What can be said with confidence is what the government was able to prove in court, and what he ultimately admitted to. Following his arrest in 2016, Martin was held for a lengthy period as the investigation and legal proceedings unfolded, first on lesser charges while agents combed through the enormous volume of seized material, and later on a broader indictment. He was initially indicted on numerous counts related to the willful retention of national defense information, each tied to a different classified document found in his possession, a case so voluminous that prosecutors and defense attorneys spent years simply cataloging what had actually been recovered. In March of 2019, Martin pleaded guilty to one felony count of willful retention of national defense information, a charge that reflected the core of what prosecutors could actually establish. Not espionage, not transmission to a foreign power, retention. The simple, staggering fact of having kept what he was never authorized to keep, at a scale almost without precedent. In July of 2019, a federal judge sentenced Harold Martin to 9 years in federal prison, to be followed by 3 years of supervised release. At the time, prosecutors described it as the longest sentence ever handed down for this specific kind of offense, a reflection of just how seriously the government treated the sheer size and sensitivity of what he had taken, even without proof that any of it had been passed along to anyone else. Martin apologized before the court. The case, in many ways, ended not with the dramatic reveal audiences might expect from an espionage story, but with an unresolved question mark, a man going to prison for what he took, without the world ever fully understanding why he took it. Looking back at the full arc of this case, what stands out isn't a single dramatic act of betrayal. It's the sheer duration of it, 20 years of quiet, undetected accumulation. Spanning 7 different jobs, 4 different agencies, and a security apparatus that was, for 2 decades, looking in the wrong direction. Martin's case became a pointed lesson inside the intelligence community about the risks embedded in its own structure, the heavy reliance on outside contractors for the most sensitive technical work, the gaps that open up when oversight resets with every new job change, and the reality that systems built to catch leaks aren't automatically built to catch hoarding. In the years since, agencies have pointed to cases like his, alongside the Snowden case before it, in pushing for tighter insider threat programs, more continuous monitoring, and stricter controls on what contractors with extraordinary access are able to remove from secure facilities. Investigators and policymakers who reviewed the case afterward noted that Martin had passed multiple background checks and clearance renewals over the course of his career, a reminder that periodic screening, however thorough on paper, cannot always catch a pattern that only becomes visible when someone finally decides to look inside a garden shed in Maryland. Harold Martin is currently serving his sentence. The 50 terabytes he accumulated over 20 years remain, as far as the public record shows, exactly what they always were, sitting unexplained in government evidence rooms rather than in the hands of any adversary. No confirmed link to the shadow brokers was ever established. No foreign buyer was ever named. In a field defined by secrets sold and secrets exposed, Harold Martin's case ends somewhere stranger. A mountain of the nation's most sensitive material, taken not to be shared with the world but simply kept from it. 2 decades of access, one of the largest breaches in American history, and a motive that, even now, nobody outside Harold Martin himself may ever truly know.